The church bells rang, but they couldn't drown out the scream. In the packed pews of St. Augustine's in Chicago, a wedding was unraveling before it even began. Maya, 18, stood trembling, her cheek stinging red from the slap her stepfather-to-be, Richard, had just delivered in front of 200 guests. She'd only asked him to stop yelling at her mother, Ellen, in the bridal suite minutes before the ceremony. Richard, 45, a broad-shouldered real estate mogul with a temper as sharp as his tailored suit, hadn't liked being challenged. His hand had flown faster than his regret, and now Maya stood frozen, her auburn hair falling over her tear-streaked face, as the crowd gasped in collective horror. Elliot, Richard's younger brother, felt his heart lurch. At 32, with dark hair and a lean frame, he'd always been the quieter sibling, the one who observed from the edges. Openly gay and unapologetic, he'd spent years navigating his conservative family's unease, but this was a line crossed. He rose from his seat in the third row, his denim jacket out of place among the sea of formal wear, his eyes locked on Richard. "Enough," Elliot said, his voice low but cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. The organist faltered, notes fading into a hollow echo. Richard turned, his face a mix of defiance and embarrassment, as if daring anyone to speak. But Elliot wasn't just anyone. He'd spent his life fighting for his place in a world that often rejected him, and he wasn't about to let this moment slide. The wedding was supposed to be perfect. Ellen, 42, a soft-spoken librarian with a kind smile, had dreamed of this day for months. She'd met Richard 2 years ago at a charity gala, his charm sweeping her off her feet. Maya, her only daughter, had been skeptical but wanted her mom's happiness. Elliot, living across the country in San Francisco, had only met Richard a handful of times but sensed something off. A flicker of control beneath the polished exterior. Now that flicker had erupted into violence, and Elliot's instincts screamed to act. Maya's voice broke the tension. "You don't get to touch me," she said, her words shaky but fierce. She stepped back, clutching the edge of her lavender bridesmaid dress, her eyes darting to her mother. Ellen stood at the altar, her white gown trembling as she gripped her bouquet. "Richard, why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Richard scoffed, brushing off the moment. "She was out of line, Ellen. Let's move on. The ceremony's starting." His tone suggested the slap was a minor inconvenience, a discipline warranted. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring in disbelief. The officiant, a gray-haired man in his 60s, clutched his Bible, unsure whether to proceed. Elliot took a step forward, his boots heavy on the polished floor. "No," he said louder now, commanding the room. "This stops here." He turned to the crowd, his voice steady but burning with conviction. "If you think this is okay, if you think a man can hit a kid and just walk down the aisle, then you're part of the problem." The room froze. Richard's face reddened. "Elliot, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." But Elliot wasn't listening. He walked toward Maya, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, then relaxed, her eyes meeting his with a mix of gratitude and fear. "You're okay," he whispered, just for her. Then louder, to the room. "This wedding isn't happening. Not today. Not like this." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Ellen's sister, Clara, 38, a nurse with a no-nonsense attitude, stood up from the front row. "He's right," she said, her voice sharp. "Ellen, you can't ignore this." A few others nodded, but most stayed silent, torn between loyalty and shock. Richard strode toward Elliot, his fists clenched. "You don't get to ruin this," he hissed. "You've always been a problem, Elliot. Always stirring things up." Elliot didn't flinch. "And you've always been a bully," he shot back. "But this time you hit the wrong person." The standoff felt like it lasted hours, though only seconds passed. Ellen's eyes darted between her daughter, her fiancé, and her almost brother-in-law. Her face crumpled, torn between love and the truth unfolding before her. Maya stepped closer to Elliot, her voice stronger now. "Mom, please, you don't have to do this." The weight of her words hung in the air. Ellen's bouquet slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the altar steps. The room held its breath, waiting for her choice. Elliot had always been the outsider in his family. Growing up in a small Illinois town, he'd known he was different by age 10. His parents, devout and traditional, hadn't known how to handle his coming out at 16. Richard, 13 years his senior, had been the golden child, successful, charming, the son who checked every box. Elliot, meanwhile, had moved to San Francisco at 22, building a life as a graphic designer and finding a community that embraced him. He'd met Sam, his partner of 5 years, at a local art gallery. Sam, 29, with curly blonde hair and a quiet strength, had become his anchor. Elliot hadn't wanted to come to this wedding. He'd sensed Richard's disdain for him, masked as polite indifference, during their few interactions. But Ellen had called him personally, her voice warm and genuine, insisting he be there. "Your family," she'd said. So he'd flown in, Sam by his side, hoping to support her and Maya. Now, standing in the church, he realized this moment was bigger than a family obligation. It was about standing up for what was right. Maya, meanwhile, was grappling with her own battles. She'd never fully trusted Richard, who'd moved into their small Chicago apartment a year ago. His charm had worn thin as his temper surfaced, snapping at her over small things, controlling her mom's schedule. But Maya, a senior in high school with dreams of studying environmental science, had stayed quiet for her mom's sake. Today, though, she'd reached her limit. Richard's slap wasn't just physical. It was a betrayal of the fragile trust she'd tried to build. As the church buzzed with tension, Sam stood up from the back row, his presence calming but firm. "Elliot's right," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't love. Love doesn't hurt like this." His words, simple but piercing, cut through the room. A few guests nodded, emboldened. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the truth. Richard's face twisted. "You don't get to lecture me," he snapped at Sam. "This is my day." "No," Maya said, her voice rising. "It's Mom's day, and mine, and you don't get to ruin it by acting like this." Ellen's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward, her gown trailing behind her. "Richard, I thought you were different," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you loved us." "I do," Richard protested, but his voice lacked conviction. He glanced at the crowd, sensing their judgment. "This is being blown out of proportion." Elliot shook his head. "You don't hit someone you love. You don't hit anyone." He turned to Ellen, his expression softening. "You deserve better. So does Maya." The officiant finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Perhaps we should take a moment." "No," Ellen said, her voice suddenly firm. She looked at Maya, then at Elliot, and finally at Richard. "This isn't right. I can't do this." The crowd gasped again. Richard's jaw tightened. "Ellen, you're making a mistake." But Ellen was already moving, stepping down from the altar to pull Maya into her arms. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I should have listened to you." Elliot stood by them, his heart pounding but proud. Sam joined him, their hands brushing briefly, a silent reminder of their shared strength. The church doors swung open as a few guests began to leave, whispering among themselves. Clara approached, wrapping an arm around Ellen and Maya. "Let's go," she said softly. "We'll figure this out together." Richard stood alone at the altar, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. The wedding he'd planned, the image he'd crafted, was crumbling. And Elliot, the brother he'd dismissed for years, had been the one to bring it down. As they left the church, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over Chicago's streets. Maya clung to her mom, her cheeks still red but her spirit unbroken. Elliot and Sam walked behind, their presence a quiet pillar of support. The city hummed around them, alive with possibility, as they stepped into an uncertain but hopeful future. The air outside St. Augustine's felt lighter, but the weight of what had just happened lingered. Ellen, Maya, Elliot, and Sam stood on the church steps, the crowd's murmurs fading behind them. Clara, ever practical, flagged down a cab. "We need somewhere to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "My place. It's close." The cab ride to Clara's apartment in Lincoln Park was quiet, the city's skyline blurring past. Maya sat pressed against her mom, her hand gripping Ellen's tightly. Elliot stared out the window, his mind racing. He'd acted on instinct in the church, but now the reality of appending his brother's wedding and Ellen's life settled in. Sam, sensing his tension, rested a hand on his knee, a silent reassurance. Clara's apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and bookshelves that reflected her nurturing yet no-nonsense personality. As they settled onto the worn leather couch, Clara poured coffee, the aroma grounding them. "Okay," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "What now?" Ellen's face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew him. I thought," she trailed off, shaking her head. Maya leaned into her, her own tears drying but her expression fierce. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom," Maya said. "He did." Elliot nodded. "She's right. Richard's always been good at hiding who he is. I saw it growing up, how he'd charm people but snap when things didn't go his way." He paused, glancing at Ellen. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." Ellen managed a small smile. "You said something when it mattered. That's enough." Sam, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "You're all stronger than you realize. What happened in there? That took guts. All of you." His words, calm and sincere, eased the tension in the room. Maya looked at him, her eyes softening. She'd only met Sam a few times, but his quiet strength made her feel safe. Clara set her mug down with a clink. "Ellen, you and Maya can stay here as long as you need. Richard doesn't get to control this narrative anymore." She turned to Maya. "And you, kid, were incredible back there. Standing up to him like that, that's power." Maya blushed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But when I saw Elliot stand up, I don't know. I felt like I could too." Elliot's chest tightened with pride. He'd always felt a kinship with Maya, despite their limited time together. She had a fire in her, one that reminded him of himself at her age, fighting to be seen in a world that often looked away. The conversation shifted to practicalities, where Ellen and Maya would live, how to handle Richard's belongings still in their apartment. Ellen's voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if reclaiming her strength. "I'll need to talk to him," she said finally. "Not today, but soon. I need to understand why he did that." Elliot frowned. "You don't owe him an explanation, Ellen. He owes you one." "I know," she said, her eyes distant. "But I need to close this chapter for myself." As night fell, Clara ordered pizza, and the group ate in relative silence, the weight of the day settling in. Maya, exhausted, fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on Ellen's shoulder. Elliot and Sam stepped onto the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "You were amazing today," Sam said, his voice soft. He brushed a curl from his forehead, his blue eyes catching the glow of the streetlights. "I know that wasn't easy, standing up to Richard, Elliot sighed, leaning against the railing. I couldn't just sit there, Sam. Not after what he did to Maya. Not after seeing Ellen's face. He paused, his voice dropping. I've spent my whole life feeling like I had to prove I belonged in that family. Today I realized I don't. I belong with people who choose me. Sam took his hand, their fingers intertwining. You belong with me, he said simply. The words, quiet but certain, anchored Elliot in a way he hadn't realized he needed. Back inside, Ellen was staring at her phone, her thumb hovering over Richard's contact. Clara gently took it from her. Not tonight, she said. You've been through enough. Ellen nodded, tears welling again. I just keep thinking, what if I hadn't listened to Maya? What if I'd married him? You didn't, Clara said firmly. You chose your daughter. You chose yourself. That's what matters. The next morning, news of the wedding's collapse had spread. Ellen's phone buzzed with messages from friends and family, some supportive, others judgmental. Richard had texted, a curt message demanding to meet. Ellen showed it to Elliot, her hands trembling. He's not going to let this go quietly, Elliot said, his jaw tight. But you're not alone in this. Maya, now awake, overheard. I want to be there when you talk to him, she said, her voice resolute. I'm not scared of him anymore. Ellen hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but we do this together. They agreed to meet Richard at a neutral spot, a coffee shop in the Loop, public enough to keep things civil. Elliot and Sam insisted on coming, as did Clara. The group arrived early, claiming a corner table. Richard walked in at noon, his suit immaculate but his face haggard, as if he hadn't slept. Ellen, he started, ignoring the others. We need to talk. Alone. No, Ellen said, her voice steady. Anything you have to say, you say to all of us. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he sat down. You humiliated me yesterday, he said, his tone clipped. You let your daughter and your brother-in-law ruin everything. Elliot leaned forward. You ruined it when you raised your hand to Maya. Don't put this on anyone else. Richard's gaze flicked to Elliot, a familiar disdain in his eyes. You've always had it out for me, haven't you? The family screw up trying to play hero. Elliot didn't flinch. If standing up for what's right makes me a screw-up, I'll take it. Maya spoke up, her voice clear. You hurt me, Richard, and you hurt my mom for a long time before that. You don't get to act like the victim. Richard's face flushed, but he didn't respond. Ellen took a deep breath. I trusted you, she said. I loved you, but I can't be with someone who thinks it's okay to hurt my daughter. We're done. The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. Richard stared at her, then stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low. All of you. As he stormed out, the group exhaled collectively. Maya reached for her mom's hand, and Ellen squeezed it tightly. I'm proud of you, Elliot said to Maya, his voice soft but firm. She smiled, a small but genuine spark in her eyes. Thanks for having my back. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Ellen and Maya moved into Clara's apartment temporarily, their belongings packed into boxes from the home they'd shared with Richard. The process was exhausting, sorting through memories, untangling their lives from his. Elliot and Sam extended their stay in Chicago, renting a small Airbnb nearby to help. Every evening, they gathered at Clara's, cooking meals together, the kitchen filled with laughter and the clinking of dishes. It was a fragile kind of healing, but it was a start. Maya threw herself into her college applications, her essays filled with raw honesty about the wedding and its aftermath. She wrote about finding her voice, about the power of family, not just by blood, but by choice. Her top choice was UC Berkeley, drawn to its environmental science program and the chance to be closer to Elliot and Sam in San Francisco. You think I could handle the West Coast? she asked Elliot one night, half joking. You'd thrive there, he said, grinning. But you've got to visit us first. Sam makes a mean sourdough. Sam laughed, tossing a dish towel at him. You're overselling it. Ellen, meanwhile, was rediscovering herself. She'd taken a leave from her library job to focus on Maya and herself, attending therapy to process the years with Richard. I ignored so many red flags, she confessed to Clara one afternoon, stirring a pot of soup. I wanted to believe he was good for us. Clara, chopping vegetables, gave her a gentle look. You loved him, Ellen. That's not a crime. The crime was him betraying that. Elliot, overhearing, chimed in. You're not defined by him. You're defined by what you do now. Ellen nodded, her eyes glistening. I'm trying. Richard, true to his nature, didn't fade quietly. He sent emails, alternating between apologies and accusations, claiming Ellen had overreacted, that Maya had provoked him. When those went unanswered, he showed up at Clara's building one evening, demanding to see Ellen. The doorman, a burly man named Tony, turned him away, but not before Richard left a note. You can't erase me. The note rattled Ellen, but Maya was unfazed. He's just mad he lost control, she said, tossing it in the trash. He doesn't get to scare us. Elliot admired her resilience. He saw himself in her, the kid who'd learned to stand tall despite the world's pushback. He and Sam took Maya to a local queer community center one weekend, introducing her to activists and artists who'd built lives on their own terms. Maya soaked it in, her eyes bright with possibility. I want to be like them, she told Elliot later. Fearless. You already are, he said, ruffling her hair. But the shadow of Richard lingered. A mutual friend, unaware of the full story, mentioned he'd been spreading rumors, painting Ellen as unstable and Elliot as the troublemaker who'd sabotaged the wedding. The gossip reached Ellen's workplace, causing whispers among colleagues. She came home one day visibly shaken. They think I'm the problem, she said, her voice tight. After everything, he's still winning. Sam, who'd been sketching at the kitchen table, looked up. He's not winning. He's desperate. People will see through it. Clara nodded. Let him talk. The truth has a way of catching up. Still, the rumors stung. Elliot decided it was time to act. He'd kept quiet about Richard's behavior for years, out of some lingering sense of family loyalty. But that loyalty was gone. He reached out to a journalist friend, Lila, who worked for a local Chicago paper. Over coffee, he shared the story, not just the slap, but the pattern of control Richard had shown. Lila listened, her pen moving furiously. You sure you want to go public? She asked. This could get messy. Elliot nodded. It's already messy. I want people to know who he really is. Lila's article, published a week later, was measured but damning. Titled A Wedding Stopped, A Truth Revealed, it detailed the incident at St. Augustine's, quoting anonymous guests who'd witnessed Richard's actions. It also included Maya's perspective, with her permission, framing her as a young woman who'd stood up to abuse. The piece didn't name Richard outright, but described him in enough detail that those who knew him would connect the dots. The article spread quickly, amplified by social media. Support poured in, messages from strangers, offers of help from local organizations. But there was backlash, too. Richard's business associates defended him, claiming the story was exaggerated. A few family members called Elliot, accusing him of airing dirty laundry. You've ruined his reputation, their cousin Diane snapped over the phone. He ruined it himself, Elliot replied, hanging up. Maya, reading the comments online, was torn between pride and anxiety. People are calling me brave, she said, showing Elliot her phone. But some are saying I should have stayed quiet. Elliot sat beside her. The ones who say that, they're scared of change. You did the right thing. That night, Ellen called a family meeting. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady. "I want to start over. Somewhere new. Chicago feels heavy now." Maya's eyes lit up. "San Francisco?" Ellen smiled, a rare spark of hope in her expression. "Maybe. I've always loved the idea of the Bay Area. And being closer to you too." She nodded at Elliot and Sam. "Feels right." Sam grinned. "We've got a spare room. Just saying." The idea took root. Ellen began researching jobs, finding openings at libraries in Oakland and Berkeley. Maya, accepted to UC Berkeley early decision, was thrilled at the prospect of a fresh start. Elliot and Sam helped them plan, sharing tips about neighborhoods and schools. For the first time in weeks, the future felt bright. But Richard wasn't done. Late one night, Elliot got a call from an unknown number. It was Richard, his voice slurred with anger or alcohol. "You think you've won?" he spat. "This isn't over." Elliot's grip tightened on the phone. "It is for us," he said and hung up. The move to San Francisco was a leap of faith. Ellen found a job at a small library in Oakland, and she and Maya rented a cozy apartment nearby, its windows overlooking a park where kids played soccer and dogs chased frisbees. The city's energy, vibrant, diverse, unapologetic, felt like a balm after Chicago's weight. Maya started her freshman year at Berkeley, diving into classes with a hunger to learn. Elliot and Sam, just a short drive away, became their anchors, hosting Sunday dinners filled with laughter and stories. Elliot felt a shift in himself, too. Standing up to Richard had cracked something open, a confidence he hadn't fully embraced before. He started volunteering at the Queer Community Center, mentoring young people like Maya, sharing his story to show them they weren't alone. Sam, ever supportive, joined him, using his skills as an illustrator to create murals for the center's walls. But Richard's shadow lingered. A month after the move, Ellen received a letter from his lawyer, threatening legal action for defamation over Lila's article. The letter claimed Richard had lost business deals and demanded a public apology. Ellen, shaken, showed it to the group over dinner. "He's bluffing," Clara said, visiting for the weekend. "He's got no case. The article didn't even name him." Elliot wasn't so sure. "He's got money and connections. He'll drag this out to hurt you." Maya, now more confident, spoke up. "Let him try. We've got the truth on our side." Ellen decided to consult a lawyer, a friend of Sam's who specialized in civil cases. The lawyer, Priya, a sharp-witted woman in her 40s, reviewed the letter and laughed. "This is intimidation, not a lawsuit," she said. "He's hoping you'll cave. Don't." Priya's confidence steadied Ellen, but the threat lingered like a storm cloud. Richard's calls and emails had stopped, but his silence felt ominous. Elliot, sensing Ellen's unease, suggested a weekend getaway to clear their heads. They drove to Point Reyes, a rugged stretch of coastline north of San Francisco, where cliffs met crashing waves. The group hiked along the trails, the salty air and open sky lifting their spirits. On the second day, as they sat on a grassy hill overlooking the ocean, Maya opened up. "I used to think I had to be perfect for Mom to be happy," she said, her voice soft. "Like if I didn't cause trouble, she'd have the life she wanted." Ellen's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Maya, you're not trouble. You're my everything." Elliot, sitting beside Sam, felt a lump in his throat. "You're both enough," he said, "just as you are." Sam squeezed his hand, and for a moment the world felt right. For people, bound not by blood but by choice, finding strength in each other. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and Maya carved love fights for truth into a wooden signpost they'd found on the trail, her pocketknife steady and sure. Back in the city, life settled into a rhythm. Ellen thrived at her new job, her warmth making her a favorite among patrons. Maya joined a campus environmental club, her passion for change growing. Elliot and Sam, inspired by their new family, started planning a community art project, a mural celebrating resilience and love in all its forms. But Richard's next move came without warning. A local blog, known for sensationalist stories, published a hit piece accusing Ellen of fabricating the wedding incident for attention. It quoted anonymous sources close to Richard, painting him as a victim of a vindictive ex and her troubled daughter. The article gained traction, shared by Richard's allies online. Maya was furious. "He's lying to everyone," she said, pacing Clara's apartment, where they'd gathered to strategize. "We can't let him do this." Elliot agreed. "We need to fight back. Not with his tactics, but with the truth." They reached out to Lila again, who was eager to help. She interviewed Ellen and Maya, this time naming Richard explicitly, with their permission. The follow-up article, "The Cost of Silence," detailed Richard's pattern of manipulation, supported by statements from former colleagues who'd seen his temper. It also highlighted Maya's courage and Ellen's journey to rebuild. The article hit harder than the first. Social media erupted, with hashtags like Stand With Maya trending locally. Richard's business took a hit as clients distanced themselves. He called Elliot one last time, his voice shaking with rage. "You've destroyed me," he said. "You destroyed yourself," Elliot replied, calm but firm. "Own it." The call ended, and Richard's presence in their lives faded. The lawsuit threat never materialized, and Priya confirmed he'd backed off. The blog post discredited, lost traction. For the first time, the group felt free. A year later, the hill in Point Reyes became their tradition. Every spring, Ellen, Maya, Elliot, and Sam returned, joined sometimes by Clara or Priya. They'd hike, laugh, and sit by the signpost Maya had carved, its words weathered but enduring. "Love fights for truth." The words had become their mantra, a reminder of what they'd overcome. Ellen had grown into her independence, her confidence radiating. She'd started a book club at the library, focusing on stories of resilience and identity. Maya, now a sophomore, was leading her environmental club, organizing cleanups and protests with a fire that inspired her peers. She'd come out as bisexual, finding support in the community center where Elliot volunteered. "I'm not afraid anymore," she told him one day, her smile bright. Elliot and Sam were planning their own wedding, a small ceremony in their backyard with fairy lights and homemade food. Maya was to be their officiant, her words already drafted with care. "You two showed me what love looks like," she'd told them, her eyes shining. The scars of the past remained, but they'd faded. Richard had moved to another state, his reputation tarnished but his influence gone. The family he tried to control had built something stronger without him. A family not of obligation, but of choice, love, and truth. One evening, as they sat on the hill, the San Francisco skyline glowing in the distance, Ellen raised a glass of wine. "To us," she said, "to fighting for what's right." Maya clinked her glass, a mocktail in hand. "To being fearless." Elliot looked at Sam, their hands intertwined. "To love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sam smiled, his curls catching the sunset's glow. "To truth." They drank, the ocean breeze carrying their laughter. The city below pulsed with life, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to stand up, to speak out, to love fiercely. And as the stars emerged, they knew they'd carry this moment, this family, forever.